In popular culture, it is an obvious fact that when Alexander stood at the Beas river, he had the information about the Nanda Empire that lay east of this river. He had the information about the strength of this empire's army and also about the origin of the Nanda Emperor who ruled this vast domain. But this straightforward story weakens when we analyze the evidence. In fact, among historians, there is a great debate on this very question. What kind of information Alexander had about what lay east of the Beas river? Did he know about the Nandas? In this video, we will try to understand this debate and we will also see what the sources have to say about these questions. But first, let's have a quick overview of the historical realities during this time. This is the summer of 326 BC. Alexander, having conquered the Punjab region through brutal conquest, now stood at the western bank of the Beas river. In eastern India at this time, the Nandas held their sway. By continuing the expansionist policy of the previous Magadhan rulers, the Nandas had created the first empire of ancient India. Although we do know that the Nandas conquered the kingdoms in the Doab region, but how west their kingdom stretched is not known. What is certain is that it did not stretch as far as the Beas river. So it was not like that the Nanda Empire started from the eastern bank of the Beas river. Now let's see what the western sources have to say about what lay east of Beas. And it should be noted that these western sources that talk about Alexander's campaign are divided by historians into two different categories: the official tradition and the Vulgate tradition. The difference between these two categories is quite simple. The official tradition is comprised of sources that were written by men who took part in Alexander's campaign. Although the primary sources of this tradition is not available to us, but these were used by Arrian to write his Anabasis of Alexander. And it is this text of Arrian that is the main text of this official tradition. If we talk about the Vulgate tradition, the sources of this text were written by men who were contemporaries of Alexander, but they did not take part in Alexander's campaign. Some of the main texts of this tradition were written by Diodorus Siculus, who was a Greek, and Curtius, who was a Roman. Another important point that should be noted is that whether we are talking about the official tradition or the Vulgate tradition, the sources which we have at present are not contemporary sources. They date from 3th century or more after Alexander's death. Now, when we analyze these sources about what lay east of Beas, we find that the information which is present is quite puzzling. If we look at the description of geography in these two traditions, there is a stark difference. If we take Arrian's account, he provides us a vague description. He does not mention the Satluj river or the Ganga river. He just tells us that the country that lay east of Beas was exceedingly fertile. But when we look at the Vulgate tradition, in both Curtius and Diodorus's account, we find that the name of river Ganga is mentioned. Here the river Ganga is called Ganges. But to reach Ganga, one had to cross a desert that took 11 days for Curtius, and if we believe Diodorus, it took 12 days. So if we believe the Vulgate tradition, after crossing the Beas river, there is a desert and river Ganga lay on the other side of this desert. Now it should be noted that in this Vulgate tradition, there is also no mention of Satluj river. The information about the kingdom that lay east of the Beas river is also quite different in these two traditions. The Vulgate tradition talk about two kingdoms, Prasai or Prosai and Gangaridai or Gandaridai. These two kingdoms were ruled by a king who is called Agramis in Curtius's account and Xandramis in Diodorus's account. In fact, the Vulgate tradition provides us information about the origin of this king's dynasty and how the founder of this dynasty ascended the throne. Interestingly, in both Curtius's account and Diodorus's account, this information was told to Alexander by Porus. It was Porus who informed Alexander that the first king of this dynasty was a barbar who ascended the throne after assassinating the previous king. Porus also says that the present king is detested by his subject. If we look at the official tradition, the information about the government is completely different from the Vulgate tradition. In Arrian's account, there is no mention of a king, leave alone the history of the dynasty. Arrian writes that the people east of the Beas River were living under an excellent system of internal government, for the multitude was governed by the aristocracy, who exercised their authority with justice and moderation. So to summarize, we get two different pictures from these two traditions. In the case of government, the official tradition talks about an aristocracy, whereas in the Vulgate tradition, it is mentioned that a king was ruling this kingdom and this king was detested by his subjects. If we look at the geographical features, in the official tradition, there is no mention of the Ganga river, whereas in the Vulgate tradition, Ganga river is mentioned. The name of the kingdom is not mentioned in the official tradition, whereas the Vulgate tradition talks about Prasai and Gangaridai. So having analyzed these sources, it is clear that on the one hand, we have an official tradition that does not provide us much information and is completely wrong about the government. The Vulgate tradition, on the other hand, is right about the king and his history, but it has no idea about the geography. It not only puts a desert between the Beas river and Ganga, but it also forgets to mention two great rivers, Satluj and Yamuna, that lay between Beas and Ganga. These confusing differences that exist in these two traditions have been explained by historians in two different ways. On the one hand, we have A.B. Bosworth, who argues that Alexander knew about the Nandas and the two traditions, Vulgate and official, are not contradictory but complementary. To understand this point, let's see how A.B. Bosworth explains two important differences that exist between these two traditions. Now, we all know that in Arrian's account, there is a vague description about what lay east of Beas, whereas in the Vulgate tradition, we have information about the king and the history of his dynasty. A.B. Bosworth argues that Arrian's vague description is because Arrian was not interested about the Nanda Empire. He was concerned about the Macedonians and their reluctance to cross the Beas river. So that is why he did not write much about the Nanda Kingdom. Now this is a reasonable explanation. Let's see how A.B. Bosworth explains the difference in the description of government. We all know that Arrian talks about the presence of aristocracy, whereas in the Vulgate tradition it is mentioned that the kingdom was ruled by a king who was detested by his subjects. So A.B. Bosworth explains this difference by arguing that the presence of aristocrats does not mean that there is no king. The Nanda king tolerated these aristocrats as long as they were under his control. So this is how A.B. Bosworth explains the difference in the description of government. Now I am sure that some of you are skeptical about this explanation, and there are scholars who have the same feeling. Scholars like William Woodthorpe Tarn argues that Alexander did not have any information about what lay east of the Beas river. He argues that the information about the Nanda king and his history, which is present in Vulgate tradition, is borrowed from accounts that were written after Alexander's invasion, particularly Megasthenes' account. We all know that Megasthenes had visited the city of Patliputra, and during this visit he must have surely gathered the information about the previous ruler that ruled before Chandragupta Maurya. So according to William Woodthorpe Tarn, What the Vulgate tradition did was they used this information which was provided by Megasthenes and inserted into the episodes of Alexander. In other words, the official tradition, of which the main text is Arrian's Anabasis of Alexander, is more trustworthy. The vagueness which it shows about what lay east of the Beas river reflects the real experience of Alexander. Alexander did not have any information about the Nanda Empire and its history. Now, if you ask me, I am more inclined towards William Woodthorpe Tarn's theory that argues that Alexander had a vague information about the Nandas. But even this theory fails to answer some important questions. We know that Alexander, when he was campaigning, he had a vast network of informants that gathered information about the geography and the topography of the region where he was campaigning. This was the situation before reaching Beas. Alexander knew about what lay ahead. So what happened on the Beas bank that Alexander did not have any information about what lay east of the Beas? Another question which this theory fails to answer is, let's say the informants of Alexander and Alexander himself did not have any idea about what lay east of Beas. But the Indian rulers that were communicating with Alexander must have surely known about the Nandas. Then why did they not inform Alexander? In fact, in the Vulgate tradition, the information about the Nandas was told to Alexander by two Indian rulers, Phegeus and Porus. But here also, not everything which is told is true. There is no desert between Beas and Ganga. And what about the two important rivers which these two rulers have failed to mention? Satluj and Yamuna. Considering this, one can certainly say that both of these theories fail to answer all our questions. At least this is what I believe. If you want to know more about Alexander's invasion, do watch this playlist, and I would love to hear what you think about these two theories. And if you like this video, do subscribe. Thank you for watching.